Hello
everyone, welcome to Practical GCP. So in one of the previous sessions, I've covered how to use IAP to gain internal access without public IP address. But those are more focused around accessing to things like SQL databases on a private network or other virtual machines on a private network via the tunneling, right? That's quite different to what I'm about to talk about today. There's a very powerful use case using IAP, arguably is actually way more powerful than the one I talked about before, is to manage internal access to applications. So what do I mean by internal applications? So in many scenarios where you want to build maybe even just a directory of all of your services, right? As your organizations gets big, and then you might have a lot of different services. You might need to create a directory of all of this, that links to all of these different places, right? You might need to give access to a lot of people to do that. How would you do that? You might host an internal app, right? There could be other things that you use to collect data, used to authenticate people internally for other internal apps. So many different use cases. So one of the typical issue with those internal apps is that it is very difficult to control the authentication and authorization of those apps. Let's say if you have an app, you only want certain group to have access, right? But the problem is the first thing you open it up, you need to open it up to the public, right? To the public internet. You may get a lot of other people outside of organizations need to, may end up gaining access without, but you don't want to do that, right? But the issue is how do you protect that? In the old days, what a lot of the people do is, the companies do, is to bring a lot of these authentication authorization layer code into the application layer, right? I mean, writing code to do those kind of things. You can do that, but it's really time consuming. It's really difficult to get right. And it's really inconsistent. This is where appengine and IAP comes in. So appengine, the reason I say appengine here is that appengine is the only serverless app builder like technology supported by IAP out of the box, right? So you can't do this with anything else easily. So this is the easiest way you can use IAP to protect your service endpoints for your internal, to only make these available to your internal users and groups. And if you haven't heard about appengine, is just one of these things that you can use to build applications. It's completely serverless. You don't manage any of the servers. You just write your code and build your apps. That's as simple it gets. And the deployment process is really simple as well, which I'll show you in a bit. The way I want to talk about this today is to show you a example app, a number of apps, actually here, Hello World apps created by Google. So there are 3 folders here, as you can see, right? So you've got the Hello World, which is just a really simple one. But if you go into it, this is the typical appengine structure, right? So you've got the app.yaml, which is the instructions how the app is going to be deployed. You have the runtime, in this case is Python 3.7. And then you have the main file, which is the main application and entry point, right? You can see this is using Flask, but you can use whatever you like as your for the web app. And here, all it does is to display the index page. And then here you've got the privacy page as well, right? So there's nothing complex. The templates in here, you just have the HTML pages. So really simple app. The second one is a little bit more interesting. So you've got the Hello User app, which has some kind of identity going on here, right? The app is the same, but in the main.py, you can see right here, when it says hello, it prints out what's in the header, which has the ex-Google authenticated header. So what the header does is that this email and this ID, they're both set by the IAP service. If you're actually using IAP to do your authentication and authorization, right? And then what this does is to print those out. So you can actually retrieve the user's identity. from the IAP set headers. So the last one is, again, very similar stuff, but you've got this, the main module here, which you got a little bit more complex stuff going on. If you look at this section, what this section does is some verification process, right? This section here. What this section does is some kind of verification process. So this has some additional verification going on here. So you can read this later. It's quite well explained. I'll attach a link in the video with the very detailed explanation of what this thing does. But in a nutshell, what it does is to, let's say if you just check the headers of the other two we talked about, the IAP set, but that can be easily spoofed, right? What if the IAP flag is off? It's been turned off. Anyone can set those headers, right? If they're a user and trying to kind of get into your systems. So this is where the third header comes in. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you've got the Google IAP JWT token. This one is signed by Google. And this code is basically a way you can use to verify this is the genuine user that we're talking about, right? This is actually a really good example to bring it down to exactly how you can manage your app securely using IAP with App Engine, right? So the deploying process is really simple. All you do is basically once you have these instruction files, you do gcloud app deploy, and that's it, right? There's a bunch of options you can use, but it's basically as simple as that, right? So what I've done is I've deployed all of these services. The default one is the one doesn't actually do anything. The reason it's called default is because App Engine enforces you must have a default service as your first one, or whenever you deploy something, you must do this first. Not sure exactly why, but you just have to do it. The other one, once you've got the default in place, you can deploy other ones, which are with specific service names. So in this case, I've got the user one and the authenticated user one, right? So it's all three of them. You may have noticed the ingress rules here are all set to all. So that means enabled to the public internet, right? So this is the default behavior of App Engine. It's kind of designed to be be public websites, right? And then you put authentication on top of that. Okay, this is where IAP comes in. So if you look at this, right, as I mentioned earlier, App Engine is the only thing that's supported by this IAP function out of the box. In this identity-aware proxy page, right, you can see all of these App Engine apps I've just deployed down below. Each of them has been assigned with a random domain, right? So here, if you pay attention, that the IAP service is switched off by default. And then that is the case after you deployed it. In other words, these services are now public. So if I open a incognito window here, right? Now I type on this, you can see this has no authenticated user whatsoever, right? And then I can see the app, right? This is bad. And now let's see how to fix it. So this is where IAP comes in. But before you can use IAP, the first thing you have to do is to come to this API services page under the OAuth consent screen to set up this consent screen before you can actually start creating credentials and use it with App Engine. So what this means is the consent screen is because this uses the Google Workspace login, right? You've probably seen like every time you log into any Google services, you use the Google Workspace login page, right? That's what that is. And you need to set up a consent page to basically say who is the contact person, things like that. And then you have a choice to say whether this is internal or external. Because we're talking about internal applications, right? We're only going to give access to all internal groups. So that's why I've set it to internal. That means only is limited to the Google Workspace users, belongs to your organization, right? That's what this thing does. Now, let's enable the IAP service. So all you have to do is to flip this thing. And then in all the App Engine apps, now it takes a couple of minutes to bubble up, but it basically means all of the App Engine apps, if you do this, will now be protected by the IAP, the IAP proxy, right? So if you already have many App Engine apps, so you need to be very careful doing this, because if you do this, all of these things you will lose access to all of them, right? So there's a way to cover how to kind of do the migration. I'm going to include a link of a very interesting video I've seen from another place, which is how I learned a lot of this stuff. But I'm not going to cover that in this session. But now the IAP service is enforced for all of the App Engine services, right? So if I open a incognito window again to make sure there's no session left, right? What it's asking me to do is to log in now, right? So you can see that it enforces me. But before, I had to actually go to the if before I was just going to the domain, right? And then it just let me in. But now I have to log in. All right. Now you see I don't have access. But there's an interesting thing just happened in there. The first thing is the App Engine app has redirected me to the login page of the Google Workspace login, right? And then after I logged in, I now see this thing, because this is the thing. If you remember, you set up that consent page. This is basically you have to set up a bunch of information and emails and stuff telling the user who to contact and what the problem is. So this is what this screen is. So now I still don't have access. Can you guess why? So if you go back to here, right? So I have enabled IAP, but I've not given anyone access yet, right? So by default, it blocks everything. And that's a very good thing. But now I'm going to grant access to a group that I know myself as a user is in there. On the right-hand side, so when you click on this, on the right-hand side, in the information panels, you can attach a principal, which is basically, you can do a lot of things, right? So service count, emails, but in this case, the groups that we're dealing with who would want to have access to the app is the one I'm going to put in there. So I've created a developers group in this organization. And then you can see that there's a bunch of things you can assign to this group. So in order to give this group access to the App Engine apps, you need to give it the IAP secured web app user role. So this role is what gives you the HTTPS result access via the IAP proxy. When you've selected it, you probably realize there's something more interesting in there. It's got something called access level. So if you click on it, you can see I've got this thing called whitelist IPs. This whitelist IPs is something I've actually generated under the access context manager under the security tab. So this is interesting. So let's go back a little bit. If you just give IAP, right, access web user to all of the App Engine users to your group, let's say this group could have 100 people in there. But in a large enterprise, what you very often have to do is you need to be a little bit more extra careful, right, on who can actually log in. So you might have your VPNs, you might have your secure network that where people would get these fixed IP ranges, and then they can actually get into the apps, right? For some additional protection, what you probably want to do is to do some IP whitelisting. That's where this thing comes in. So the context manager, you can do many powerful things, but one of the most used probably things you can use is to set the subnets, the subnetworks ranges, the CIDR ranges. So I've just put my IP address in here, but obviously you can use any CIDR ranges that, for example, your VPN address or whatever, right, in that place. But there's more things you can do here. You can also put the geographic locations, right? You can say only the people in the UK can do it. Or this thing is quite interesting. I can't show it right now because it's the premium package. But one of the things I saw, I'll attach the video where I saw this thing as well, is you can add device context. So that could mean things, you must be on a MacBook, or you must be on a Windows machine, or you must have your drive encrypted, or even you have the screen lock enabled, right? It's very powerful stuff in this section if you are premium users, but you get the idea. Coming back to access levels, I'm also going to enable whitelisting IPs. So after saving this option, you can see on the right, I've given the developer group IAP access, right, with the web app user, plus must meeting the condition, the whitelist IPs, right? So that gives you the double layer protection. So it's not just you're in the group, you can log in, but also you need to be on the right IP range to log in, right? This takes a bit of time to take effect, but let's see what happens now if I log into, let's try this one, right? The next one, the hello user this time. Okay, now you can see, I can see the user. It also shows that the account, email, and then the ID of my account, right? So this is very interesting. So if I use the last one, obviously I don't have to log in again. Now you can see this is coming from the header of the two headers with the email and with the ID, and then this is the verified one. So this is the verification that we've issued ourselves to make sure the ID actually match up, right, to the same user. So this is the kind of even you have IAP disabled, and if people want to try to spoof this, the first part, they cannot spoof the second part, which is, this is what gives you the protection. So you can see how powerful this stuff is, right? So you basically can have all of the apps that you develop for internal use protected from any user from accessing on the public internet with almost zero effort, right? There's no code required to do the authentication layer, because all you have to do is to create different AD groups, right? And then sync that with the Google groups. And then with those Google groups, you can have different group of users, and then you can give them different, different access to different kind of apps, right? So this gives you a very good integrated control with the IAM, because that's what this does behind the scenes and what it integrate with. So now you can use the IAP to manage all your internal applications with no external access, right? This is extremely powerful stuff that for you to develop internal apps. So one last thing I want to talk about is the limitations. Obviously, this is very powerful, right? And then you can do a lot of things with appengine and with IAP, but there's a problem. If you look at this section, I'm just showing you right here. Many large organizations have VPC SC, which stands for VPC Service Control Enable, which give you a bubble, right, to protect all of your product and services. But appengine does not support this. So when you're creating your appengine apps, you need to make sure you put the outside of the service perimeters, because otherwise you cannot use them at all. So it's very, very important that you create a new GCP project or a few GCP projects and put them outside of the boundary. And then you can do some whitelisting to allow it to access other services, or you can send the data in a non-sensitive way to get the appengine in those projects to access. But there's some faffing around that you need to do. I can probably see why Google haven't actually put this to make this support the service boundaries or the service perimeters. I guess one is probably the appengine is quite an old service. It's been around for a long time. It might be quite tricky to do so. But the other thing is, this is, we're talking about public apps, right? If you think about the protection that we can get earlier, so you can easily create the app itself, right? And then you protect it with the IAP. On top of that, you can also do this context-aware management on access, which gives you additional layer of control, such as IP whitelisting. So it's pretty powerful already. And then you can, if you just put whitelisting rules for those App Engine projects to be able to access your data in your boundary as just the one access point, right? So it's not like you open it up to the entire world. It's only to the App Engine projects. It's still very sufficiently protected, right? So I don't see this as a problem at all in terms of using this service for a large enterprise. Okay, I think this is the end of the session. I hope you found this useful, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.
Go out!